Thanks for joining us. This is the Something Better podcast from the City of Bakersfield, where we're going to talk about city issues, talk to some of our city officials, city staff, and the people that bring our services and projects and programs to our residents. I am Joe Conroy. I'm the host here for the Something Better podcast and the public information officer for the city. And I'm joined today for our first episode, and yes, this is our first episode, with City Manager Christian Clegg.
Happy to be here. It's exciting.
Glad to have you. Yeah, we're excited. So like I said, this is the first episode, so probably have some growing pains here a little bit. So forgive us as we go and learn and figure out how we're going to do this. So again, like I said, Christian Clegg is our city manager, and he's our first guest here today. We're actually going to do a two-parter, so this will be our first part. First, we want to get to know you a little bit, Christian. So we're going to do a little bit of an icebreaker thing here. We've got a couple sets of questions, and I'm going to have you pick some numbers. So first, we have our icebreaker section, which is numbers 1 through 10, and then we have some more in-depth questions that are 11 through 60. So give me a number between 1 and 10, and then a number between 11 and 60.
Favorite number's 3, so
We'll
go with 3. And then how about 27?
27, okay. All right, so number 3, what is the last song you listened to on repeat?
The last song I listened to on repeat, I believe, was What Was I Made For, Billie Eilish from Barbie movie.
Okay,
I just got to be honest.
Okay, very good. Why that song?
It's sort of eerily touching.
Okay.
And so I was in this moment of reflection, and I let that one go.
All right, sounds good. So number 27, you said, right?
Yeah.
All right. So again, these are a little more in depth. So how do you stay updated with trends in your industry?
Yeah, great question. So city managers, not everyone would necessarily know this, but we have an International City Managers Association. It is international, although it was started here in the United States, and it is thousands and thousands of professional managers who have invested their careers in this space, and so they have They actually have a monthly magazine. They also have regular white papers that come out. They have regular posts on the website, and so staying connected, through the professional association is super important. There are other resources that are relevant to local government also. There's, Bloomberg Philanthropies has 2 different schools that they work with, both Harvard as well as Johns Hopkins, and they have what's called a What Works Cities, and so there's lots of sharing amongst cities. One of the great things about the public sector is it's all public information. It's all common knowledge, and I think we have to also thank Mother Google that you can search anything you want, and so it's fantastic to be able to go and just borrow from the public domain. Lots of people have come up with really good ideas. We find ways that those can be adjusted and changed to fit with Bakersfield, but there are lots of professional sources to stay up on those trends.
Why is that so important to keep with those and check in on those different groups in these different ways? And has there been anything that you've pulled from those that we've seen here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we don't actually have the answers to everything. I think sometimes folks want to think my leaders know everything what to do, but I think a good leader also can be vulnerable and say, I don't have all the answers, but lots of people have found those answers. And we can save so much time and effort by going and finding ideas that have been done in other places, but more importantly, the things that work and don't work. There's lots of research out there, too, about what hasn't worked and things that aren't best practices. And so implementing best practices typically can bring the most benefits to our community with the least amount of effort and investment, and we want to maximize that for our community. One example, which we actually will chat a little bit about later, is this topic around gun violence. And so there have been multiple cities who have also been facing the same challenge of gun violence, and I would make a quick comparison. Something like homelessness is a much more immediate and recent issue, but unfortunately, gang and gun violence has been around for a long time, and so there are many places that have worked this issue, and they found the things that work best. you go and implement those things that work best, and you see really big results without having to go through some of that learning curve and trial and error that others have, learned from.
Somebody's already done that work for you, and you've seen, yes, this works, or maybe if we tweaked it this way, it would work better. So that's good to know. So you've kind of alluded to it, and also thank you for the tease for later. We'll get to some of that other stuff as well, and keep people around for maybe the second episode. So first, we mentioned your title is city manager, and you've been here for just under 5 years, I think, about
That's
4.5 or something.
That's right.
You got here right after I did. I think about 6 months after I did. What is a city manager? Because I'll be honest. When I moved to Bakersfield, and I'm from the East Coast, but when I moved to Bakersfield, I'd never heard of a city manager. I didn't know what that was. In my high school and middle school civics classes, we always learned about mayors and city councils and things, but we have a city manager and a council and a mayor. How does that all work? What's the role there?
No, that's a great question, and it's not uncommon for folks to not fully understand that. My own, blessed mother, I've been doing this for 2 decades, and she's like, "What exactly do you do?" And so it's important to acknowledge first that our elected officials play a really important role, because they put their name out there, and they, go out in the public, and they are also chosen to represent their constituency in making important decisions. But the city council and the mayor, their role is largely around adopting policies, making laws, adopting the overall budget, setting a vision for the big picture, but then it's full-time staff who are responsible to implement. We put all that into practice. We put all that into work. And so a city manager, I'm actually responsible. The city has just over 2,000 employees. There are 2 employees that are appointed or selected by the city council. That's the city manager and the city attorney. All other employees in the city report up through to this city manager, or for those in the city attorney's office, the city attorney. And so those 2,000 employees, they're my responsibility to make sure that they're doing their jobs well, that we're being thoughtful about finding ways to do our work better. We want to always get better, faster, smarter. We also want to make sure that we're being good stewards of taxpayer dollars, and getting those monies spent as most efficiently as possible. And so each of those departments has a department director, and they're responsible to make sure the work happens in their department. But overall, myself as city manager and some other folks in the city manager's office, got a great support team here. We make sure the departments are doing the work of the city, but we need to think about strategy and how do we do continuous improvement, set up the right culture and values in the organization, and keep finding ways to add the new programs that are responsive to the needs of the community today, because they do change over time. Some things, we're always going to pick up your garbage. We're always going to make sure that water comes out the tap. But we also have other challenges that come up, and that's also really where we lean in. And super important piece of solving the most complex problems that a community has is partnering with a lot of other agencies. This is another piece where I think a lot of members in the community assume that the mayor, or maybe the council, or even the city manager, if they're the city manager, that we can, everything's within our control. But there are many areas that are not within the city's jurisdiction that we need to reach out to county agencies or nonprofits or state agencies.
Or somebody has a better reach than we might in that space.
Yeah, precisely. And so a big piece of my job is actually forming those relationships and working in those partnerships, in addition to making sure that the city is just running efficiently.
Right. So council, like you said, they may say, hey, you know what, we want to see this. We want to see whether it's a specific program, or we want this. We're hearing this from our constituents that they want a program, or they need help with something, or something's not being done about some issue that they may be facing. Council then comes in and says, we want you to take care of this, and then it's up to you and your staff and your directors to kind of figure that out a lot of times.
Somebody needs to go do the research. Somebody needs to do the homework. We need to look at the budgets.
Can we do it? How do we do it?
Yep. Make recommendations back to the city council about the best way to get that thing done. Again, ultimately take some adjusting and guidance from the council, and then ultimately approve. But somebody needs to go do that homework, make those recommendations, and then also go and implement and get it done.
And ultimately, the council is the one that decides, yes, do that plan. You've come back with a plan or a couple of options. This is the one we want to go with. It's up to them to vote on that. I've heard it likened to kind of a CEO and a board of directors. Is that
absolutely
accurate?
Actually, and in other cities that you've mentioned that may have a mayor that doesn't necessarily have a city manager, the mayor is often considered the chief executive because they get to make some of those executive decisions about who to hire and what programs to run. But the city manager in a council manager form of government is the chief executive. The council is the legislative body, but the city manager is the chief executive. And it's like running a corporation. And we want to be smart and run it like a business in as much as we can, but also we recognize that democracy has an important a part to play in all of this. And so we also have to know how to manage that democratic process and governance and listen to the community, as well as run a good operation. Just let me geek out for just a minute.
Sure.
I love the city management stuff. If you were to look at the cities across the nation, there are thousands of cities across the nation. The vast majority actually have a city manager or city administrator.
I was going to ask, yeah.
Particularly small cities, like you might find a really small 1,500 population city in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest. They may not be able to afford having a full-time city manager. There's not a lot of operations going on. So the really small cities tend to have a mayor who they may hire some staff, and the staff just does the work. And then on the flip side is on the other end of the spectrum is really large cities. So, New York City, Los Angeles, those large cities. Typically, they're older cities, but they're also really large cities. And there's a trend where folks want to, be able to have an elected executive where they say, we can really hold that mayor accountable, to make sure things are happening the right way. They tend to lean towards adopting bylaws or charters. Cities even have charters. It's kind of like their constitution that dictates that a mayor is going to be the chief executive that hires people to do that work. But most cities that are somewhere between 5,000 up to 50,000, 100,000, and even larger cities like Bakersfield at 400,000, it's fairly typical to have a city manager who's doing the day-to-day. They're full-time professionals that do this for their entire career. And this is not a discredit to elected officials. Again, they play a super important role in understanding the will of the community and communicating that to staff. But to have somebody who's been doing this for decades and has seen how this works in other places and knows all these professional standards, there's a lot of value that comes with that as well. And so most cities will have a city manager, city administrator. And I would note, again, just for those listeners, Bakersfield, it's interesting. We feel like a small town, but we have a 400,000 population. We're actually the 47th largest city in the nation.
Yeah.
And we're the 9th largest in California, most populous state in the nation. And so most cities, except for maybe like that top 15, 20, 25 cities in the nation, many of those are mayor executive cities. But pretty much cities all the way up through, Bakersfield and even slightly larger cities are typically city manager cities.
Okay. And, a couple things you mentioned, accountability. That's why it's important for some of these cities. They want to have a mayor so that they could be voted out. But you serve at the pleasure of the council. So if they find that, you're not executing our vision, they still have a recourse to say, you're gonna go, we're gonna bring in somebody else, or whatever may be the case.
Yep, 100%. And let me give a particular example because I think it shows what you're talking about. Where there's actually statements in the Bakersfield City Charter that say City Council is not to interfere in personnel matters, and so I get to decide whether employees are hired or disciplined or fired. But also at the end of the day, if I've got a city council telling me this is a really big problem, I listen to my council.
Right.
First, it's the right thing to do. Second, I respect the council. But third, the council can say, we're giving you direction. And if that direction is not followed, I'm out. The council can boot me any given Wednesday.
Right. And we mentioned before that, you're here, you've been here about 4.5 years. You came here from Stockton. And you have experience in other cities, city manager office experience. What does a city manager's office do? So not just yourself, but just the city manager's office in general. What does that look like for the public?
Yeah, to expand a little bit on what I was describing earlier about just providing that oversight to all of the different departments, we actually have some staff members that are called assistant city managers and assistant to the city managers. We also have administrative staff that are helping when a citizen calls in and says, "Hey, I need help with X," or can you help us get a tree limb removed that's fallen across the sidewalk, or we have
pothole or
pothole,
issues
any of those
with,
things.
yeah.
So those types of requests often cover a broad range of issues, and so there's no one department that necessarily handles all of those, but we create a central point of contact that can have both resources available to the community to respond to those things, but also have eyes on all those things, so we see the trends and we understand what are the themes and sort of concerns that are going on in the community. And then we can respond and also work with the departments to make sure those things get followed up on. And so we have some functions that also benefit the entire city. And so we have our communications and marketing folks, like the team that's helping put together this podcast, that they serve the entire city. We have a risk team that serves our entire city, the city clerks team that serves our entire city. And so those teams combined with the executive staff of the city manager's office really just provide that strategy, that oversight, and even accountability down to the departments to make sure things are happening that need to happen in the city.
So, you mentioned before we have around a little more than 400,000 people that live here. We're the 9th largest city in California, 47th in the U.S., and that means that we face a lot of big issues. So I want to touch on a little bit of those right now, and again, kind of teasing a little bit to our next episode, but some of the issues that the city's facing and how are we addressing some of these? So things like homelessness, public safety, economic development. Is there a message that you have for the community maybe that on how we're addressing those issues?
Yeah, great question. I would say first off, I've mentioned a couple times best practices and learning what other people are doing. Just know that we both understand the big issues for our community. We know public safety is paramount. We know that homelessness is a big frustration point. We know people want to see quality of life, and we're working hard towards all of those. The community should know that we actually have a 5-year strategy, that we've identified key outcomes that we need to achieve, and that we're measuring statistics to make sure we're making progress towards those big picture outcomes. We've taken that strategy and also put it into a 1-year work plan of highest priorities identified by the city council that they hear from the community. And then we're deploying our budget and our staff to get at those highest priority issues. We're looking at, again, what are the best practices that other places have used. And we're also, because of the Public Safety Vital Services tax and we've gone out and been really aggressive in getting a lot of grant monies. We've received more than $100 million in grant monies in this last year alone, so that we can make big impacts on those things that are the highest priority. Again, the biggest strategic pieces. And we don't necessarily control all factors in some of these, which we can talk about later. But then we're also reaching out to partners to say, we need help. We need help from the jails, and we need help from behavioral health on topics around public safety and homelessness. But we are putting more time and resources towards those biggest ticket items than anything else.
Great. That's perfect. And we'll touch on some of those a little bit more in our next episode. So I want to tease a little bit ahead to that. And we hope that if you've enjoyed listening to this and hearing from Christian, you'll tune in again to our next episode where we're going to dive into some of those topics a little bit more, particularly homelessness, the public safety aspect, and economic development. And so again, this is the Something Better podcast. My name is Joe Conroy, and we want to thank you for joining and listening. And we look forward to having you back for the next one. And again, thank you, Christian.
Happy to be here, talk about city management.